Hello, and happy marvelous Monday, everybody. How are you today? I hope that you are doing extraordinarily well. I am super excited that you are joining me today. I'm live on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook. Welcome. I'm Karissa Spann, the abundantly blessed landlord and tenant expert. And today's segment is all about understanding the hard truth about paying rent. Who is this live for? If you're watching a replay, thank you. This segment is for new landlords, aspiring landlords, for tenants, or anybody in the rental community. On my previous segment, I had a collection agency who came on. He talked to the landlords, he gave advice, he gave information. But today, I want, as professionals, housing providers, as well as tenants, to know and understand the hard truth about paying rent. But before I get into the segment, just a little housekeeping here. If you have comments, remarks, or observations, please throw it in the comment section. I will address it while I am live and online. Now, if you're watching a replay, if you're tuned in on my YouTube channel, leave a comment in the chat. I always go back to look at the comments and I do respond. So again, thank you and welcome. This is what I do each and every Monday right here, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on this platform that you're tuned in on. If you have not already subscribed to that YouTube channel, please go over to YouTube. Find me there, Landlord Lyfe with Karissa Spann. Listen, you want to subscribe so that you'll be the first to know when I'm live, when I'm online, and when I upload new videos. And so each week, it's a different segment. It's a different topic. Why? Because I strongly believe in educating and helping to improve rental communities. All right. Do also want to share that information I share today is not legal advice. However, it is the industry's best tips and practices. I hope that by the conclusion of this segment today, that if there was something that you didn't know, if you had questions, or maybe you just had some uncertainty, that I can clear all of that up for you on today. Is that all right? All right. So I wanted to get that in the way. And so again, we are talking about the hard truth about paying rent. I've had a lot of landlords who reached out because tenants are not paying rent in some rental communities. And listen, I've been in the industry for almost 30 years in some sort of capacity with residential real estate. And it is not new that some landlords do have tenants who struggle to pay the rent. That's not an uncommon practice. That will happen for many tenants. There are many tenants who are struggling. There are many tenants who are not paying their rent. But I believe that when we understand the dynamics of what's going on as a housing provider, as a landlord, as a property owner, or aspiring investor, there are some things that can take place that can kind of help with that situation. Now, I'm not suggesting that this strategy or the strategies I'm sharing today will work for all tenants, but I promise that having a different mindset and handling your rental property business in a different way can, in many cases, yield a different result. And so I just want to make sure that for those of you who are tenants, if you have questions, I do want you to ask your questions, because as a tenant, one of the things that I emphasize week after week, month after month is this: as a tenant, you do have rights. Landlords, you do have rights as well. And so sometimes I believe that there's just a huge disconnect. Sometimes people are just flat out confused. Maybe they don't remember what they're supposed to do, the time period that they're supposed to do it, right? And so this is going to be a reminder, a refresher for some, and for others, it may just be new information. So with whatever platform you're tuned in on, again, I just want to say thank you and welcome. And so as we are unpacking this information today, as we are talking through the strategies and how to navigate this issue, I want you to keep in mind that at the end of the day, it is a rental property business. I strongly believe in the philosophy, for those of you who are business owners, if you treat it like a business, if you treat your business like a business, rather, it's going to pay you like a business. if you treat it like a hobby, it will pay you like a hobby. Why am I sharing that? Because sometimes, especially for individuals who self-manage their property, it's easy to get your feelings caught up with a tenant not paying rent, maybe a tenant damaging the property, as well as other things that happens in a rental property that you never imagine, right? But that's not the time to get your feelings all caught up in the business aspect of that rental property. That's the time to take action. But that's another day, another segment. Today is all about the hard truth about paying rent. All right, let me pause here. Let me go to my comment section. Hello, Jennifer. Thank you so much for tuning in. Beautiful, happy, marvelous Monday. So I am happy to share that as long as I've been in this industry, I have helped thousands of landlords. As a matter of fact, I have managed over 12,000 doors, helped over 12,000 families in managing property. I've worked in various roles and capacities, from managing property to inspecting property. I've worked at several housing agencies, and I am also a housing educator. I teach property management. And so when I come and do these lives on Mondays, I just enjoy sharing. I believe that an educated rental community works better when people are more knowledgeable and understand the do's and the don'ts, what they should and should not do. All right. So again, I'm delighted that you are joining me today. But now here's the thing. When it comes to the hard truth about paying rent, I know that a lot of people are struggling to pay their rent. Listen, I was doing a little research and I did some study on today. And here is one hard truth before I get into unpacking this and providing strategies. Approximately 44.1 million Americans are renters. Okay. And of those, approximately 3,000 were interviewed. They completed a survey. Approximately 49% of them gave a response and said that the rent is just simply too high. Now, that's not specific to any specific area, whether you're East Coast, West Coast, Midwest, up north, down south. In many major cities, this is a common problem where the rents are too high and tenants cannot afford it. Now, I am not saying that all of these tenants are participating in some sort of housing program, because many are not. Many are just market tenants. They're just not homeowners, right? They just pay their rent. They need a place to live. They need a roof over their head. At the end of the day, I think we all can agree that we all need a roof over our head. And in some sort of capacity, we are all tenants. Even as a homeowner, you are a tenant. I mean, you own the property that you live in, but essentially we all need a place to stay, right? But when it comes to renters who cannot afford it, many times, in many cases, when they make a cut, it's primarily, and in many cases, the first thing they will cut is their rent. So I'm going to unpack some strategies today to help those of you who are struggling. Those of you who are landlords and you're trying to maintain especially affordable properties. There are a lot of tax credit properties. There are a lot of low income properties that are popping up. Developers are coming into the market, recognizing the opportunity to provide housing, affordable housing, that is, for families and individuals in need of affordable housing. But now, for those of you who have rental property, maybe you don't have a tax credit property, right? Maybe you're just trying to make ends meet. You're renting your property out. You have a single family home. You have a townhouse. Maybe you have a condo, right? You're just trying to make ends meet. And sometimes you can easily get a tenant in, and at first glance, maybe things look like it's the perfect relationship. But somewhere along the line, that tenant begins to miss a payment, or maybe they're late on their payments consistently. There are ways rather to handle those type of situations so that you don't go in the hole. You don't go in the red. You definitely don't want to be in the red. You don't want to be upside down. So The question is, what do you do when that happens? All right. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about this because it is definitely needed. I know that in many cities right now, there is emergency rental assistance programs that will help tenants. One of the things that I tell landlords is this: if you have a tenant who is delinquent on their rent, and if you know of resources available, provide that information for your tenant, because sometimes tenants may be embarrassed, ashamed, or prideful, if you will, because they're already delinquent on their rent. They're dodging, they're ducking, and they're hiding from delinquent rent notices. They're hoping and keeping their fingers crossed. Many are praying that they don't have to go to court for non-payment of rent. But unfortunately, all of those things are sometimes inevitable, right? Like, that's just part of the process. But what I want landlords to know is this: there are some strategies I believe that you should consider if you have, whether you're currently, you're previously, or maybe you are going to have a tenant who is not going to pay rent, or maybe they're consistently paying the rent late. Affordable housing is a brutal subject to unpack, right? And my goal is to equip you with actionable items so that you could manage or avoid some of these ugly battles. And so that's what today's segment is all about. So the first and foremost, what I want you to know as a landlord, as an owner, is this: focus on what you can control. Because there are things that are in your control, right? So I mentioned a little earlier about a delinquent rent notice. If you do not have a system in place, that's the first thing that you want to do. Make sure that you have a system in place. Send out your delinquent rent notices. Send out those non-payment of rent or those court notices to your tenants promptly, because that's the first thing that you must do. And I know that there are a lot of landlords who don't know this information. I had a young lady who reached out to me. She was a tenant. She reached out to me on my YouTube channel, and she left a comment that the owner of her rental property gave her less than 24-hour notice to move out, and that is definitely illegal. So as an owner, you want to know what the laws are in your jurisdiction. I always say that the law, real estate law, landlord and tenant law, is one of the things that I enjoy talking about, because I want people to be knowledgeable and understand what you can and cannot do. But again, focusing on what you can control. Do your part early on in the relationship. Get those notices out, notify the tenant, because if you make the mistake, as some landlords have, and illegally evict the tenant, maybe you went in, or you know someone who went in and changed the locks without taking the tenant to court, and the judge actually gave you a judgment or a writ to say that you could change the locks, it's illegal. So you have to make sure that you're following the rules, follow the guidelines, follow the regulations. They are in place. Unfortunately, in tenant-friendly jurisdictions, the laws are not in favor of landlords. But that's another segment for another day. All right. You want to verify affordability as a landlord. Always verify affordability. What does that mean? So if I know that I have a tenant who consistently pays the rent late, one of the things that I'm going to do is immediately contact the tenant. Hey, Mr. and Mrs. Tenant, we haven't received your rent for this month. Is everything okay? And sometimes, just depending on your relationship with the tenant, they'll open up, they'll tell you, well, yeah, I was laid off, or my dog ate the paycheck, I had an emergency, I lost my car, the kid got sick, I had a family emergency. So they will usually, and in many cases, they'll tell you what's going on, right? So when you understand that there is some sort of financial change, something has happened in their finances, you understand that, okay, well, maybe they can afford to pay the rent, but something has happened that has prompted them to either pay late or not pay at all. Now, if they tell you that they just flat out lost their job, they don't have the income, or maybe their income decreased, that's something completely different. So if they cannot afford to pay the rent, then here's what I would suggest. Maybe consider allowing this tenant to enter into a move out agreement, meaning that the tenant understand that, listen, if you stay in the property and if you don't pay your rent, chances are I'm going to have to take you to court to evict you. And you don't want that on the record, right? And so maybe offer that tenant the opportunity to move out, maybe give them a 60 or 90-day notice, letting them know that if they move out within that time period, you will not take them to court. You will not put that on their credit report because it could negatively impact them. Sometimes tenants are inclined to avoid going to court, and some will take the move out agreement. Now, also in that move out agreement, please also consider that they are already having a financial hardship. In the move out agreement, offer to return their security deposit. And I know that sometimes that may not be what you want to do, but here is the benefit of allowing tenants to enter into a repayment agreement. A move out agreement. It's cheaper. It could be cheaper, potentially. It could be cheaper to do a move out agreement versus them staying in the property. You're not getting any money. In many cases, many of you will have to take that tenant to court, which means that there could be attorney fees, there are court costs and legal fees associated with going the court route. So with allowing tenants to enter into a move out agreement and giving them back their security deposit if they move out within 60 to 90 days. Imagine and think about how much money you could potentially save by doing it that route. At the end of the day, you're going to get that rental property back a whole lot quicker versus taking them to court. They stay in the property and they don't pay the rent, right? You have no money coming in. That's bad for business. You want money coming in. So you want to take control of that situation as quickly as possible. So again, focus on what you can control. Verify affordability. Now, if it's a situation where the tenant is, let's say, they can afford to pay the rent, but they're just not paying the rent, then unfortunately, sometimes you may just have to take them to court and have them evicted. And then the third thing that I would always suggest for you to do as a landlord or housing provider, always seek legal advice. Understand what you are required to do. There are some jurisdictions that will require you to have maybe a business license, a renter's license, or some sort of documentation, legal documentation that should have been filed, right? So you want to know and understand what is required of you, of your rental property business in that area before you even go to court, because you don't want the worst case scenario to happen, whereas maybe you're supposed to record the property, get a license, and maybe the property should have an exemption number or registration number. And let's say you didn't know that and you don't have those things. And because you didn't seek legal advice, you got all the way to the courthouse, you went before the judge, and you just knew it was going to be a slam dunk. Why? Because this tenant has been in the property, have not paid rent in over 9 months. You're upside down. You're pulling your hair out. You're stressing out. You don't know what you're going to do because you have no money coming in, right? You go before the judge. You're excited. The day of court, you're like, yes, I'm going to get this tenant out of this place finally, right? You go before the judge. Worst case scenario happens. The judge tell you, oh, Mr. and Mrs. Landlord, we're going to slap your hand because you do not have a license. You have not registered your property. So we're going to dismiss the case. We're going to continue the case. That would be a bad day for you. And I have seen so many people go through that, which is why every week I'm providing this information, hoping that it is of value, right? because you do not want that to happen. So make sure that you understand the importance of seeking legal advice from a reputable landlord and tenant attorney. I am not an attorney. So for your legal questions, please do not contact me. I am not that person, okay? But before, like I said, before you go the court method, before you go to court route, understand what you must do. Now, if you're taking a tenant to court, let me just drop a dime in the meter here and let's just park for a second. Before you take a tenant to court, please make sure that you have made repairs to that rental property. I would never, ever recommend taking a tenant to court if you have not made repairs, because that could be very ugly. That could definitely backfire. Here's how that could look. You go before the judge. It's your day. You're excited. You have all your ducks lined up in a row. You have your license. You have your exemption number. You have your registration number. And you go before the judge. And the tenant says, well, Your Honor, I would have paid my rent, but my landlord has not made repairs. I have mice, I have rodents, I have mold in my home. I've told my landlord and they have done absolutely nothing. It's made me incredibly sick. My kids have lead poisoning. Like, they're going to run down the list of things that are wrong in that rental property. And that list can be very ugly. It can be very expensive, especially at the last minute, right? I mean, repairs in general is just going to cost you, but you don't want to wait. In other words, don't wait until you go to court to learn that repairs are needed in the property. So make sure that you are taking care of repairs so that your property is in the best shape, that when you go before the judge, you'll get a slam dunk. Okay? I would never, ever advise you to take matters into your own hands if you don't understand the legal requirements, the things that you are supposed to do. All right, so now let me pause and go to tenants, because I do have tips for tenants. If you are in a situation and you're having a hard time or a challenge paying your rent, I do want you to know this. The first thing for you as a tenant, understand your lease agreement. Here's why that's important. Landlords are not required by law to care. There's nothing in that lease that says that a landlord must care about your personal situation, if the dog ate your paycheck, if you have other bills you have to catch up on, if, like, there are a lot of things that can happen. I get it. I understand. But landlords are not legally required to care that you have a personal situation. Now, however, if you have a landlord who does care, please appreciate them. But I would always say, understand your lease agreement, because just because you are having some sort of financial challenge and you can't pay your bills, that's not the landlord's problem. I had a young lady who had been delinquent. So I started managing this property, and this one young lady had not paid her rent in almost 12 months. So the owners, they wanted me to come in and help them out to get the property back on track. So I had a conversation with the young lady. I looked at her rental ledger. We sat down together. We went over it. We talked about the rent. We talked about the late fees. I asked her what caused her to get off track and what was her plan to get back on track, if she had reached out to any programs or agencies to obtain rental assistance, if she reached out to family, friends, or loved ones, if she was working, if she lost her job. Like, we went through a lot. We covered a lot of bases. And she was working, and for whatever reason, she just did not pay her rent. So the landlord had already initiated court proceedings against the young lady. So she went to court. She told the judge that she would like to enter into a repayment agreement. She was seeking emergency rental assistance to try to help her. So she contacted me after going to court, and she said, well, the reason why I'm not paying my rent now is because I'm behind on my bills and I'm trying to catch up on my other bills. I have daycare to pay for my daughter and I just cannot afford to pay rent. Well, she had to go back to court. She was not happy about that. And she immediately called me. She says, didn't I tell you that I was behind on all my bills and I got all these bills to pay and I can't pay my bills and the rent? So I listened to her talk. I'm patient. I do practice empathy. Empathic listening is so important in this industry. Sometimes just being a listener first can allow tenants to get off their frustration, but just don't feed into that fire. So she finished talking and I thanked her for sharing. And I had to politely let her know the same way that she have bills to pay, the owner of the property also have bills to pay. And just because she's behind doesn't mean that the owner must accept the fact that she's not paying her rent and will forego evicting her. Of course, she didn't like that, but I did explain it in a way that she understood it. So again, as a tenant, please make sure that you know and understand the terms of your rental lease agreement. And just because you're behind, listen, I know that life happens. Life just be lifing for so many people. And as long as we live, listen, live life so that life is not living you. Let me just put it like that. Because as long as we live, there's going to be something, right? And so understand that rental lease agreement. Landlords are not required by law to care that you have a situation. The second tip I want to share for tenants is to budget. Make sure that you budget for your rent. I know that sometimes, especially now, it's the summertime, it's getting nice. Some of y'all are trying to get y'all little beach body together, right? You want to look good. You want to go to the beach. You're getting your summer clothes. The kids need summer clothes. You need sandals and things for the summer. Some of the kids are now out of school or preparing to wrap up the school year, and there are trips and things that you want to take for the summer with the family. I get it, but please budget for your rent. Pay your rent first. You always need a roof over your head. Pay that rent bill first, because I promise that if you get kicked out as a tenant, if you're evicted, everybody will know that you're kicked out. But if you pay that bill and maybe you don't pay your electric bill, or maybe you don't have food in your refrigerator, nobody knows that. But you always want to maintain a roof over your head. So please budget for your rent. Now, I had a tenant who contacted me. This tenant had over $500 in late fees. So imagine over time how many times she did not pay her rent, or maybe she paid her rent late. $500 in late fees is a lot of money. It's a lot of money for some. But for me, it's a lot of money to just give away, because if you have to pay late fees, I don't believe in giving money away. So paying your bill on time will eliminate you having to pay a late fee. So budget for your rent. Don't give away that rent money. Don't give away that extra money as a tenant. I'm sure the money that you are spending or have spent on a late fee, you can buy a meal, you can maybe pay a bill, you can do something great other than paying it to your landlord because you paid your rent after the due date. Save that money, invest it. As a matter of fact, take that late fee money and put it into a savings account for either yourself, your kids, or somebody. Do something great. Be great with it other than giving away that extra money. And then here's another tip for tenants. Know the consequences of paying your rent late. Because about a week or so ago, I had a company that came on, a collection agency, and he was sharing tips for landlords. Did you know that as a tenant, if you're evicted, your late payments, all of those things can be reported on your, it can be reported on your credit. You definitely don't want that. So there is a credit impact. Understand that late payments can definitely affect and impact your credit score, as well as your rental history. Also know and be aware that you could be evicted if you're not paying your rent or if you're consistently paying your rent late. Your landlord may be able to take you to court. You definitely don't want that. Know your status. Know what you can and cannot do, right? And understanding that late payments do matter. So let me put this in the atmosphere for those of you who are tenants and maybe you have struggled with paying your rent late. Let's say you work, or maybe you have a fixed income like TANF, Social Security, SSI, SSDI, things of that sort, right? The same way that you expect to receive your payment on time each month, the owners and landlords are expecting the same thing. And I like to tell tenants like this, in this way. If you don't want people playing with your money, please don't play with other people's money, right? And again, I understand that life happens. So if you find yourself in a situation where you can't pay your rent, you're behind in your bills, communicate as early as possible with your landlord. Avoid at all costs, if possible, having to go to court, because it's not fun. That's embarrassing. And you don't want that on your record. You don't want that on your credit report. And so I'm still talking about the hard truth about paying rent. And now, just depending on the area, some landlords will take you to court if you are consistently late paying your rent. Some landlords will not renew the lease because I promise that as a business owner, it is in the best interest of that owner to terminate that lease and to allow another tenant to come in and pay the rent, and who will pay that rent on time. So don't put yourself in that trick bag. If you're a tenant, don't go down that road if you can avoid it. All right. And so those are the tips I wanted to share today. And like I said, for landlords, again, focus on what you can control. Make sure that you are doing what you're supposed to do when you're supposed to do it. Immediately send out those delinquent rent notices, making sure, okay, let me just pause here. Let me just tell you my strategy when I have tenants who are delinquent on their rent. Just depending on the community, I will door knock. When I have tenants who pay rent late, I'm gonna send a delinquent notice, and when I'm delivering the notice, I'm knocking on the door. Hey, Mr. and Mrs. Tenant, you're a little late on the rent. Is everything okay? Oh yeah, Miss Karissa, I'm gonna get it in next week. I'm gonna pay the rent plus the late fee. I love those type of tenants. Something happened, they're still going to take care of the late fee. Not a problem. But at the end of the day, I'm in control of delivering those notices. If the tenant respond, if the tenant provide an explanation, at least that gives me something to work with. But if not, I've done my part. I've delivered the blah, 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 the delinquent rent notice. And if they still do not pay, then I'm going to follow up by sending that tenant to court. So I'm going to contact the attorney to say, hey, listen, I have this tenant. They have not paid their rent. Here's a copy of their lease. Here's a copy of their rent ledger. Please file a suit against this tenant. You want to promptly do that. You should have a SOP, standard operating procedure. You should have a workbook, some type of policy in place that will guide you on what you should do, the time frame that you should do it. So if the rent is due on the 1st, and let's say any day after the 5th, if they make their payment, maybe the 6th or the 7th or the 8th, you should have a policy in place that will address what comes next. What do you do next? Do you charge them a late fee, or do you sporadically charge them? Maybe you will charge them, maybe you won't. You want to have a consistent flow with whatever your policy is and implement it. Stick to your policy. These are the things that you have control over, right? Following up with that attorney. After you send it over to the attorney, it's your responsibility to follow up. Hey, Mr. and Mrs. Attorney, where are we? I sent this file over requesting a suit for this non-payment rent case. Can you tell me Have you filed the paperwork? Has the tenant been served by the process server? Have you received the court date yet? Stay on top of those things. Sometimes I know you may not think to do those things, but that's what you have control over. Focus on what you have control over. So let me pause because I see a comment or a question here. Hey, Ronnie G, thank you so much. Absolutely. That's what I'm here for. All right. So focus on what you can control. All right. Again, you want to verify affordability. Can the tenant afford it? Or maybe they can afford it and they're just not paying the rent. But you don't know unless you ask these questions. So always ask, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Tenant, I see that you're late this month in your rent. Is everything okay? Has something happened? Have you lost your job? Was there a change in your income? Has there been a change in your family structure that would create a situation for you to not pay your rent? Understand what's going on. And if you can help this tenant to understand the importance of paying, communicate that. But now you will have some bad seeds who will just emphatically tell you to your face, I'm not paying the rent. I don't care what you do. I don't care about your delinquent rent notices. I don't care that you're taking me to court. I'm still not paying the rent. You may have a situation like that. That's just life. Don't take it personal. Don't even take it personal. But do your best to verify affordability. Residents are finding themselves in a financial struggle. And I don't know if you know this, but every time I look around, there are a lot of businesses that are folding, that are closing. A lot of people are losing their jobs, and people are really struggling to pay their rent. If you know of resources available for your tenant, let them know that maybe there's an organization, there's a company, some churches even will help tenants who are delinquent on their rent. Help the tenant to help themselves, to help you get the rent, right? Verify affordability. And then again, make sure that you understand the importance of seeking legal advice before you take action. Make sure that you understand what you are required to do and have before you pursue legal evictions or proceedings against a tenant for delinquent rent. You always want to understand specific laws and regulations that are in place, because from one jurisdiction to the next, the laws are definitely going to be different. Okay. And here are my tenant tips. All right. Understand your lease agreement. These are tips for tenants. Understand what is in writing. Landlords are not required by law to care that you have a situation. And just because maybe you did not read your lease before you signed it doesn't mean that that's the landlord's responsibility to not hold you responsible for what you signed. So when it comes to that lease agreement, it is a legally binding document. And if you don't read it, it does not stop the landlord from taking you to court. It does not stop the judge from evicting you because you did not understand what's in your lease. So please review that lease, ask questions. I always like to tell tenants, before you sign on that dotted line, consider signing on that dotted line like you saying I do in a relationship or marriage. Understand what you're getting into, ask questions up front, because it is a contract. It's a contract at the end of the day. Second tip for tenant is this: budget for your rent. Pay your rent first. If you're having any challenges paying your rent, communicate that early with your landlord so that they'll know what's happening. Because if you have a landlord who is a kind, sweet person like me, maybe they'll go easy on you. Maybe they'll delay sending you over to the attorney. Maybe they won't evict you. Maybe they'll give you time to catch up on your rent. But you don't know it until you have those communications. Budget for your rent. And one of the things that I do also like to share is this. I know that many people are struggling financially, right? And they all need a place to live. But I would never, ever recommend a tenant to move into a place that they absolutely cannot afford. If, for instance, your rent is, let's say the rent is $1,500 a month, right? And your only income is $1,900. I know that sometimes desperate matters calls for desperate last minute or quick decisions, but it would not be in your best interest to use all of your money to pay rent, because if something comes up, if an emergency happens, God forbid an emergency happens, you're going to find yourself in a situation where you're going to be up a creek without a paddle. And if you're paying more than 30 or 40% of your income, you already cannot afford it. So try to look for areas and places whereas the rent is affordable. Now, I know that sometimes that may not be possible, and I get it. But as much as possible, please make sure that you budget for your rent. And if you are in a rental property, you know that an emergency has happened. You have to pull money from somewhere, and maybe you don't have savings. You don't have money tucked under a mattress. You don't have, change in a jar. You just don't have it, right? Just kind of look at what you have, where you are, because you don't want to be set out. You don't want to be evicted. That is definitely not a good thing to have on your credit report. And that goes into my third and final tip for tenants today. Know the consequences of paying your rent late. It could impact your credit. It could put you in risk of being evicted. So those are the tips that I wanted to share today, talking about the hard truth about paying rent. I do hope that this was helpful. I understand that we are in a kind of a different type of day now, especially for housing providers in tenant-friendly jurisdictions such as California, New York, DC. It is sometimes heartbreaking, the things that the rental communities go through. But that's why I do these segments each and every Monday. I'm right here live on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It costs you nothing but your time to show up. Again, I do hope that this was valuable today. I didn't have a whole lot of comments or questions, and I get it. This is a touchy subject matter, and I know that a lot of people are taking notes. I know that I'm going to get some emails, but for those of you who do not have my email address, let me give it to you. And if you're watching on that YouTube channel and you're watching a replay, I do respond to the comments on my YouTube channel. So please make sure that you subscribe so you get that notification. All right, so let me share my email address with you. Feel free to email me, but if not, drop me a line in the comment section. I'll go back when I look at the replay, check out your comments, and I'll respond to you. So that is my email address at the bottom of the screen there. It's going to be info@landlordlife.com, info@landlordlife.com. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope that you will like, tag, or share this segment with somebody. I do appreciate you. Please make sure that you tune in each and every week. If there is a topic or if there's information that you would like for me to cover, please let me know. Drop me a line or two. I will definitely cover it in the upcoming weeks. My time is up. I absolutely thank you for yours. And again, on that YouTube channel, you can find me there. You can even find my replays. That is Landlord Life with Karissa Spann. Life is spelled with a Y. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, it has been a fantastic pleasure having you to join me today. I look forward to seeing you all next week right here, same platform, whether it's Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube. I'm Karissa Spann, the abundantly blessed landlord and tenant expert. I look forward to seeing you all next week, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Bye for now.